Hello friends, welcome to Read Through the Word. Today is Saturday, April 5th. We're in the book of Judges today, and our key verse is Judges chapter 17, verse 5. Now this man Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod and some idols and installed one of his sons as his priest. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as he saw fit. And we've been reading, right, about these different judges that have come to positions of leadership to supposedly try to help Israel. Some of them have been somewhat helpful, and some of them have also done some really wicked things. And so we know that there is a lack of leadership in the land of Israel. I should say a lack of good leadership in the land of Israel right now. There is somewhat lack of leadership, and what leadership they kind of have from time to time isn't necessarily always good leadership. So this is kind of where they find themselves. And in the middle of, these heartbreaking stories about stories like Samson, and I know tomorrow then the lesson goes to a very difficult story about a Levite and the concubine that he had. So in the middle of all these difficult stories, because they are somewhat difficult to read, they're kind of somewhat violent, and it's difficult to read and to think about just the way that these judges did help in some ways, but also in some ways how they were part of a lot of the wickedness. So in the middle of all these stories, we have this very strange short little story about a man named Micah, who is from Ephraim, and his mother has some silver. Not sure how she came about it. It says she took it. I'm not quite sure if this was obtained in a way that was right or not, but we do know she has it, and she has I'm sorry. I said that wrong. Micah took the silver and gave it back to his mother. So somehow, I don't know if it was stolen, lost. I don't know what the scenario is, but his mom now has this silver, and she gives it to someone who, a craftsman, a silversmith, who makes an image, makes it into the image of who made them into the image and the idol, and they were put in Micah's house. And then Micah installs one of his sons to be priests. Okay. And then we know that later a Levite from Benjamin we don't know why he's left, why he's traveling somewhere else, but he ends up agreeing to be paid and given, clothes and housing, and he will be the priest for Micah, sort of like with this idol. And then it said also that there were an ephod, some idols, a shrine that he had made to put these things in. And later, when there's a group of Danites that come along, and they actually end up stealing some of the idols and saying to the priest, hey, why don't you come with us? It'll be even better for you. It'll even be a better situation. And so he does, and they're stolen. So we think, what is so great about this idol? And we know that in Israel, they end up having a huge problem with worshiping idols. Here's the interesting thing about this, though. And I know that in a lesson way back in Exodus, I don't remember if it was this year or a previous year, I remember talking about in a lesson that when we saw the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, right? Moses comes down as he's coming down from Mount Sinai, realizes Aaron and these people have, created this golden calf and worshipped it. And I remember in one of these lessons talking about that the main sin, though they were worshiping it, the main sin was a little different than we may have assigned it. In other words, they were not actually worshiping the golden calf. And so I feel like that's kind of how I always remember this story. They were wrong because they were worshiping the golden calf. Now, they were still wrong, and they were worshiping something other than God or the way God should have been worshiped. But just this little twist on this story helped me understand this so much better. The sin of the Israelites and the golden calf probably had more to do with the commandment of not making anything, about God into a graven image, idol, right? Because at that time in the ancient Near East, when people had certain idols, statues, whatever it was, they really were not worshiping that thing. They were worshiping the God represented by that thing. In other words, there were all kinds of gods that they worshiped, and this idol was like their picture of who this God was. Not only that, but sometimes when they would make an idol, they felt like a certain deity would kind of animate that idol or inhabit it or sort of bring it to life, so to speak. That object would sort of be animated and have the presence or the idea of that God with it. And that it almost sounds like you're mincing words, like it's such a small distinction, but it really is a big distinction, because Micah and his mother and his family and this Levite priest were not looking at this silver object saying, I'm worshiping this object of silver. And it's still wrong, but I feel like it's wrong for a different reason. When you look at the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, yes, it was wrong, and God was not happy about it, but it wasn't like this checklist of, hey, I said you shouldn't do this, you disobeyed, therefore, there's consequences. Because when God created human beings to dwell with him, he did not need an idol to represent himself, because he put his image in human beings, right? We're made in the image of God. And you almost think, what is an idol? It's supposed to be an image that represents a God. But when God made us, he was saying, you don't need to worship this thing, or you don't need to worship my image through this thing, because my image is in you. It's in people. And so God's direction not to worship an idol does not just come from this checklist of, hey, don't worship this thing, worship me. Because sometimes the Israelites did feel, especially, as they're getting to know who this God is, Mount Sinai's happening, they're like, whoa, who is this God, and they're learning about him. So the golden calf wasn't a total rejection of Yahweh. The golden calf was their misunderstanding that they needed to cast some physical object in order to animate or keep the presence of God with them. So their sin was more that they just kept misunderstanding and not getting it, that God was totally different than the pagan gods around them in their culture. That God did not want to be represented by this lifeless thing. God wanted to be represented in his people. He wanted to be represented as his presence within his people. You and I are representatives of Adonai. And so I think it's important when we look at a story like this, when we look at this story about Micah, it's not that this Levite priest and Micah and, and the Danites that wanted to take it, yes, obviously it's silver. So it's, got value just, on its own, just because of the material. It was probably it could be overlaid with silver. Also, the idea was they were thinking that they would somehow retain the presence of God, or maybe even manipulate the presence of God, or somehow they felt like that this idol would animate the presence of God in their lives, and that's why they wanted it. But their main sin was forgetting that God does not need a physical thing, a physical representation, a physical non-living representation of something in order to have his presence known, have his power known, in order to connect with, in order to show his power and his presence to his people. So mainly, his people just either kept forgetting or kept going back to pagan ways because they just chose not to listen to what God was saying. So for a variety of reasons, people forgot that Emmanuel, right? So when Jesus comes, he's a with us God, right? People forgot that he's a with us God. That we are his representatives on earth, and we need not try to find something to remind us or connect us to his presence. We are in his presence. And when we come together as the body of Christ, we are also magnifying God's presence. So an idol is not necessarily this thing that we worship, that we think, money or cars or certain lifestyles, or even there's all different things we could say, oh, that's an idol, or a television show or whatever. But ultimately, when God wanted people to understand this about idols, he wanted them to remember that his presence, he wants his presence to be seen, magnified, known in his people. It made me think of the verse in 1 Peter 3:15 in the NRSV UE, New Revised Standard Updated edition, when Paul says, "But in your hearts sanctify Christ as Lord. Always be ready to make your defense to anyone who demands from you an accounting for the hope that is in you." And the reason why I thought about this is because as much as I love to study this book, and I know you do too, as much as we love to get together and dig in, we're not doing that for the sake of saying that this is God, because it's not. And I think sometimes teaching can start to stray towards this being God when it's meant to connect us and educate us and help us understand who God is and the way he wants to connect with us. So this in and of itself is not God. And I know this may sound crazy, but the Bible could be used sort of like an idol in that way too. If someone knows the Bible front to back and they're constantly teaching about what the Bible is saying, right? But 1 Corinthians 13, if they don't have love, if it's not giving a reason for the hope that they have in a way that makes people see the indwelling presence of God in our lives, then that's not how the Bible's supposed to be used. The Bible should draw us, teach us, train us, connect us with the true living God, with Yahweh, with Adonai. That's what the Bible should do. And so, and I love how it says in 1 Peter 3:15, to give a defense to anyone who demands from you and according for the hope that is in you. And a lot of times I think I've taken this verse as, okay, I need to know exactly what the Bible says so I can lay out my defense and make sure it's rock solid and, debate someone or whatever. But that verse is saying so much more than that, because what this verse is saying is your defense should give a reason for the hope that is in you. It doesn't say make sure you can give a defense that will like be the perfect, debate that you can't punch any holes in or whatever. It's saying something about your ability to explain what's going on in this book to people should give people hope. Should look like Christ in us. Should give people a picture of how God dwells with us. Thanks for joining me here today, friends, and we'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.